I think one of our most important national missions at this time is strengthening our emunah. In difficult times like these, it can be hard to see a Kadosh Baruch Hu's hands from the tragedy and from the loss. It can be hard to see how Kadosh Baruch Hu is orchestrating everything behind the scenes. It can be hard to see a Kadosh Baruch Hu at all. And in these exact times, it's that much more critical to think deeply about our emunah, what it is that we believe, and why. So I thought I would dedicate a couple episodes to going over the yesodot, the fundamentals of emunah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why and what exactly we believe, to strengthen ourselves at a time when perhaps it's more difficult to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hands, at least for some of us. And I'll start today with the source of emunah. Where is our emunah supposed to come from exactly? I'll explain what I mean. And the truth is, it is a very big machloket between the Rambam and the Kuzari. The Rambam has a whole intricate allegory describing the nature of your relationship to God, and basically comparing it to your closeness to the king, and saying that your closeness to God depends on the degree to which you have studied and logically analyzed your faith. So he says that someone who does mitzvot by rote, this is what he was trained to do, but he does mitzvot. This is like a villager who belongs to the kingdom. He would love to meet the king one day. He would love to go to the palace one day, but he's never even seen the palace. It says, then you have those who they don't just know the mitzvot, right? They learn halacha, they learn how to keep the mitzvot, and furthermore, they know hashkafa, right? They know what they're supposed to believe and not believe. They know the ikarim. Nonetheless, the Rambam compares these people to those who are outside the palace and just keep walking around it, but can't find their way in. And they're destined to walk around and around and around, and they'll never actually go into the palace. He says, then there are people who actually take the time to analyze the roots of faith and the roots of theology and the roots of religion, the roots of what it is that we believe, and they study them in depth. Not just the halacha they study in depth, and not just the ideas they accept passively. He says that's a much lower level of emunah. But the higher level, that's those people who have accustomed themselves to learning carefully and thoroughly the yesodot of our faith. Those are the people who have already entered in to the gateway of the palace. It says, and then there are those who have gone through the proofs for God, the disproofs for God, logically worked through how God is, who God is, what it can be, what it can't be, can he have a body, can he not have a body, why it must be that he exists, why he's the only thing that must exist. Those who have thoroughly analyzed those ideas and have arrived conclusively beyond a shadow of a doubt at their conclusion in God. So those are people who have gone into the palace and they are intimately equated with the king. The upshot of all this, according to the Rambam, is that the path to proper emunah and knowledge of Kadosh Baruch Hu is through the rational mind. Right? It's through the analysis of that which we believe and the challenge of that which we believe until you can confidently arrive at a conclusive perspective on God. Right? So it's the rational mind, according to the Rambam, which is the source of our emunah. The Kuzari takes the complete opposite approach. The Kuzari says that someone who needs to do this is actually on a lower level than someone who is able to see themselves as a recipient of a tradition of belief in God, which came before them and which was passed down to them. And if you can wholeheartedly accept your position within the chain of our tradition, that's a much higher level. But it's important to note the context that the Kuzari speaks about this in. Right? The Kuzari is called, or rather the Chaver, the rabbi that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the author of the Kuzari, speaks of, is called to speak with the Melech Kuzar, right? The king of the Kuzars, who is having a recurring dream that he has the right intentions, but his actions are wrong. And so he starts asking questions to the major world religions and philosophers to try to clarify what it is that he's doing wrong and what is the truth. He keeps having these dreams and he can't get away from them. So he asks a Muslim and he asks a Christian and he asks a philosopher, what is it that you believe? What do you believe in? And, what am I doing wrong here? Finally, for example, the Christian, he says, what do you believe in? The Christian says, well, we believe in the God who created the heavens and the earth. And then he calls the Jew and he says, well, what do you believe? And the Jew said, well, we believe in the God that took us out of Egypt. And the king of the Khuzaris thought that was a ridiculous answer. He says that's such a minimizing and strange conceptualization of God. God who created the heavens and the earth, that tells me something, fundamental about God. The God who took you out of Egypt, I don't care what God did one time, right? If you're describing yourself, you don't say, well, who are you? Well, yesterday I went shopping. That's not describing you in any real way. How is that your conceptualization of God? How is that what you believe in? And the Kuzari says, well, first of all, it's not, I didn't come up with this conceptualization of God, the God who took us out of Egypt. That's not my line. That's God's line. When God introduces himself to the Jewish people in the Midbar at Har Sinai, he doesn't say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Barat Hashemayim V'Taretz. He says, Asher Hotzeticha Meretz Mitzrayim. I took you out of Egypt. That's who I am. And the reason he introduces himself that way is because that's something that means something to us. That's something that we witnessed. We were there, right? And that is the best way to arrive at God's existence. Not through something theoretical, philosophical, theological, something that happened in the past, something that you can or can't prove, something that we may spend every single generation proving and then disproving and then proving and then disproving in an endless chain of trying to logically conclude something that will probably be argued about for all of history. That's not the way, says the Kuzari. The way is through your experience. God introduced himself as the God who took us out of Egypt because that's something everyone listening just experienced. That gives personal, individual context to relate to God. And explains to Kuzari, that is the best way of believing in God, right? Through individual experience. Now, this resonates with the Kuzari because, again, he keeps having this dream and he can't escape it. And maybe he agrees, that the dream is, I don't know, maybe he agrees philosophically with the philosopher that God doesn't want us to do something specific in this world. He doesn't, watch over each and every one of us and want us to do this and not to do that. Maybe he agrees theologically, but he's like, but what about my dream? I just keep having this dream. And so he can't escape the fact that his personal experience is leading him in a different direction than perhaps his philosophy. And when the Melech and when the Chaver comes in and tells him, no, your personal experience is the best way to find God, so that resonates with him very, very nicely. I'll add that the Ibn Ezra addresses the Kuzari's exact question. He says he actually had a conversation with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. And the Ibn Ezra answers his question differently. The reason why God said, I'm the God who took you out of Egypt, is because not everyone can do what the Rambam was talking about. So God was talking to the lowest common denominator. It's not to say there isn't a value in the logical analysis of your faith, right? But you have to start somewhere, and not everyone can do what the Rambam was talking about, and not at all ages can someone do what the Rambam was speaking about. So the Ibn Ezra sees it as built-in levels. First and foremost, you accept that you're a part of this tradition that had a collective national experience at Har Sinai, and that's what we are relaying from generation to generation, and receiving that as the basis of our faith, right? But ideally, says the Ibn Ezra, those who can should go beyond that to whatever degree they can. I want to add just one note about the Kuzari's idea that probably serves as the strongest source for my personal faith. I remember when I was in the army, I was working with non-Jewish soldiers who were converting, and many of them found many aspects of Torah, of Judaism, of halacha to be quite beautiful, but they didn't believe in God. And so they would speak to me and they would say, it makes sense, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, I want to be part of it. I just need you to convince me that God exists. Right? Which was, no small task, but something that I prepared for on some level, and I would start walking through them, the proofs, the ontological proof and the cosmological proof and the teleological proof, and we would argue in that, we would get into it, and at the end of the day, for the most part, I felt that I was able to give over the content in a meaningful way, in a way that they did not have a substantial response why what I was saying was incorrect. And I said, okay, great, so you believe in God now? And they said, I don't believe in God now, I just don't know how to argue. I don't know how to respond to the things you're saying, but that doesn't make me believe in something. And that got me really thinking about why. Why doesn't that work? Why isn't it working? I'm explaining to them in a perfectly rational fashion that they cannot reject an argument for the existence of God. And it got me thinking about my own faith and why I believe in God. I don't believe in God because of the ontological proof or the teleological proof or the cosmological proof. I don't believe in God for those reasons. So why would I expect anyone else to? Meaning maybe they're convincing, but at the end of the day, if I'm honest with myself, those have nothing to do with why I believe in God. And if you came in and obliterated those arguments, I would still believe. So I had to dig down deep and ask myself, well, why is it that I believe? Right? If it's not for these reasons, if it's not for logic, why is it that I believe? And at the end of the day, like the Kuzari spoke about, my personal experience in my lifetime convinced me of that I was interacting with something divine, something above me. At a certain point in my life, it made more sense to believe that God was intervening in my life based on my personal experiences. And that was the foundation for my faith. And that's what I started conveying to the soldiers as well. And that's when something started to stick. They started to look for God in their own lives, in their own personal experiences. And that went much further than the different arguments or different proofs. And I think that there's a lot of strength to seeing God through that way. If you can imagine, someone's walking through the desert and they're about to pass out or die of dehydration, die of starvation. And they say, if there is a God, please, I need something to drink. And a bottle of water falls from the heavens, right? And you're like, well, if there is a God, I'm also about to die of starvation. And a full meal, falls from the heavens. That doesn't make belief in God any more logical, strictly speaking. That's not going to be written down as a logical argument for God, like those posed by Aristotle. It's not. But for you who experienced it, that's a pretty good reason to believe that there is someone else here. I think that this is a difficult time, but it's a time when we're struggling, when we're having these difficulties. Specifically now is a time when we're going to be able to see God's hand in the darkness. When we need God the most, when we call out to Him the most, when we rely on Him the most, because there's nobody else we can rely on, that's when we're most likely to see Him. As long as we feel that we could take care of ourselves, or someone could take care of ourselves, or someone else can help us, and there's some other way, so we're much less likely to see God's intervention. Right? But when we have no other option, when we have no other option, and we turn to God and say, Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's only you can help me right now. This is when we have the opportunities to see Him more clearly than any other time.